Hi, I'm Selina from What's Up Oxford. I'm joined today by the Minister of Agriculture. I've got Ernie Hardeman. Well, thank you for joining us, Minister.
Oh, good morning, Selina. It's good to be here.
So I know this is not how we normally do our interviews. We're normally in the studio sitting with each other, but we've all gotten really good at learning how to manage Zoom and communicating different ways during this time.
Well, that's right. Obviously, for the last 5 or 6 weeks, this is the only way we get to communicate with one another, and it's almost like we've been doing this all our life, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little bit different. So I know that there's a lot of questions about how things are going right now. I know in my world there's a lot of farmers. This area there's a lot of dairy farming, and right now we're hearing stories of milk being dumped. We're hearing that eggs are being sent to the breakers, that there's food being removed from the food chain. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Well, I think first of all, I want to say I appreciate and congratulate all the people who work in the food chain, right from the people who are the primary producers, right on through to the processors, the transportation people, and the distributors, and the supermarkets, and all the people who work in the front line to distribute our food and keep the food chain going. Now, since that started, of course, there was when we put out the first orders to create the emergency, one of the things that happened was where a lot of people eat, all the restaurants in the province were closed. Now, all of a sudden, we had a complete change of where the food needed to go in order to get to the people's tables. And so the things that the type of packaging and the type of activity that was in the going into the restaurants was packaged differently than that which was being sold in the stores. So all of a sudden one morning they all wake up, and you refer to the milk, we all wake up and no milk is going to the food service industry. More milk needs to go to the homes, but that's a totally different delivery stream. It goes on different trucks, it comes from different factories, and it's sold in a totally different venue. Different people are buying it to go home and cook. So all of a sudden we saw what would appear to be a shortage of milk. There never was a shortage of milk. There was milk going in that had no home on this side, and milk on the other side was short. The industry had to remove some of that out of the market, but they've accomplished that, and we now have sufficient production, and it's all going into the people who want it, and everybody has milk on the kitchen table.
So we've managed to redirect that produce then.
Yeah, so it just took I spoke with the dairy farmers as recently as yesterday, the board of the Dairy Farmers of Ontario, and actually milk consumption is almost where it was. The milk in the supermarket delivery system, shall we say, the consumption has gone up considerably. It's not up quite as much as the food service sector was buying, but they're going to have to reduce their production over the next little while to ship less milk. So they'll be reducing the amount of quota each farmer has, not that they keep producing milk that we don't know what to do with.
Yeah. Now, what is there any stimulus or any kind of relief available for farmers right now? Because there are farmers that are directly impacted by these shutdowns.
Well, I think that's obviously we have support programs for agriculture all the time to deal with things that farmers can't control, bad weather, early frost, things that they can't control. And they have what we call ag stability programs that we can use to help them along. Those programs obviously are not set up to deal with the pandemic. So we're working very what should we say, hard, trying to make sure that we, together with the federal government, obviously when it comes to agriculture support, the federal and provincial governments have combined authority to do that. So all these programs are funded jointly by the federal and provincial government. So we're working with the federal minister and all other ministers from all other provinces and territories to look at redesigning the program to cover what should we say, the challenges we're facing today.
Now, what are some challenges that the factories are running into right now? Because I know we've still got people working side by side, producing cheese, processing meat, doing all of those things. But obviously, those are essential workers. So what has been put in place to make sure that those people are kept safe?
Well, I think that's true. As you mentioned, that these factories have to work there, and they're frontline workers. That doesn't mean they don't catch the virus. So we have to make sure that all the factories have a plan of how they are going to deal with the distancing, the social distancing of their workers. In places where they can't distance, they must then again apply plexiglass between the two, so they still are separated. And all these things, they have to have a plan to be able to keep working. It still doesn't work all the time, and there is a challenge with finding enough people in all these plants to keep the plants running as effectively and as efficiently as they need to. That's why we also have a challenge with our primary producers of not having places for their animals to be processed because the factories aren't able to keep up. There are some major plants that are closed today because they're stopped for a complete cleaning because they've had somebody that was detected as positive. And so to protect everyone, they shut down to make sure they do everything they can to keep the workers safe.
Now, has the government put in place policies for such plants, for that type of shutdown, what it looks like to make sure that they are safe?
Yes, every plant that's operating must have a plan approved by the medical officer of health, the health department, to make sure that they're following all the protocol to deal with that. Now, I think we need to make sure we understand that the plants have a great interest in keeping their workers healthy and safe. Yeah. Because if they are tested positive, they're out and they're short of help. So everybody is working together, and as has been said before, we're all in this together, and everybody has the Ontario spirit, and it's we'll come through this together.
Yeah. Now, Ernie, we're getting into that time this spring whenever we're planting, and we usually see an influx of migrant workers at this time of year. That's how we harvest and plant all of the produce that we make in this area. Is there any changes there, or what's that going to look like this year?
Yes, actually, that was one of the challenges that we had a few weeks ago. It seems like ages ago, but it was only a few weeks ago, where the process was starting to bring in the migrant workers, but we didn't know exactly how that was going to work because the borders were closing and so forth. We were able to, with the federal government, work out a protocol that they could start coming over, but when they came, they have to be quarantined, just as everyone else that would come in that has been out of country coming in. They have to self-isolate for 14 days. So all these workers that came in have to be self-isolating for 14 days, and those 14 days they can't just be working on the farm and call it isolating. They have to literally not be working. They have to be isolated in, what we say, confined to quarters, I think they would call that in the service. But they have to go through that, and it is moving along fairly well. I think we have some 20,000 somewhere in that neighborhood that are here now, and they're still coming daily. That they come on charter flights and come in. So it's coming along fairly well, but we are having some challenges. But most of them have arrived reasonably prompt enough to actually help with the planting. A few weeks ago, when we were getting so much sunshine, everybody was getting worried because it looks like we're going to have a real early spring. I guess the good thing was that kind of changed a little bit again. So I think most of the isolation will be finished before they actually have to get out and really involved in the planting. There's some harvesting that need to be done, like asparagus and so forth. That's starting already, but I understand that they have most of the workers for that already available. I think it's important to recognize these they just don't bring a group of people from elsewhere and move them in. These are people that come every year and work in the harvest for the farmer, and they kind of become like a family there. And they know exactly what they have to do, and that's why it's not so easy to say, well, why don't we just get somebody from that it's unemployed from the car plant that could come in and do this work. It's a specialty work, even though we might not see it that way from here.
Now, will this lead to there being job openings within food production this year? Is there going to be more postings available?
Very, very much so. We actually have created a website to connect people that are looking for work with and the companies or the job placements, shall we say, can register their business there, and people can go on the line and see where the opportunities are and get in contact with them to try and put the two together. I've had a number of calls in the last few days about student workers and so forth, how they go about getting students. There seems to be a bit of a change that a lot of the student employment that generally was there isn't being there this year with them. When we look at the tourist industry and the even municipal industry, they're not into the students as much. So there's hopefully an opportunity for some of them to come and work in the agriculture industry. And I think there are a lot of different type jobs in agriculture. It's not just the primary producers that you work in the field. There's other jobs in processing. There's other jobs in the livestock industry. I've had a number of those contact me in the last few days looking for summer students they would like to have come to work for them.
So what is it that the average person that's going to the grocery store that maybe they're working or they're not working right now, what can they do to support local foods, making sure that we're supporting our own agriculture here within Oxford County and within Ontario?
Well, I think it's very important to recognize that we all have to purchase what we need. Obviously, the produce and so forth, if it's available here, hopefully that the stores will have it available. I think whatever you do, not just in food, but every time you have the opportunity buying local from, not only from local produced food, but locally supplied food. I think it's great that you see people say we have takeout Wednesdays where everybody should go and buy takeout from a local restaurant who has switched from being a full service restaurant to just takeout. That's buying local. It's not what's on the plate, but the fact that you're supporting that local business is, I think, the important part. And I encourage everybody to support local businesses wherever they can when they're making purchases.
Now, do we have less food coming across the border from the States at this point in time because of the shutdowns and the fact that they have such a higher level of infections there?
No, as far as I know, there's been no change. Food moves freely across the border. Obviously, the virus, it has to go through the same protection that it always has. Cabbages don't have the virus. And so I think it's important. It's a people thing, and so I think that that's not a challenge. Obviously, most of what we eat, most of that comes across the border, shall we say, from anywhere, is ingredients that are going to be used in the manufacturing system. There's not very much coming across the border that we're importing the raw material. The pork we have here, we export the majority of the pork we have already. So we don't import much pork unless it is already prepackaged.
Okay. Now, what are some other things that you'd like people to know about ways that we can help? I mean, we've talked about supporting small business. How can we help support the farmers? How can we make sure that we keep that food chain as healthy as possible?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I tell people that's so important collectively is we have to appreciate the frontline workers who are keeping the food chain going. My job is to facilitate everybody be able to do things that need doing. But the truth is, I can't personally keep the food chain going. That can only be done by the frontline workers in the system, from working at the producing level to working as the clerk at the local store. I get somewhat uptight when I see people complaining to people because they didn't do just what they wanted. I think show appreciation for the people who get up every day and know they're taking a risk by going out there to serve the public, but they're doing it because we want them to. So thank a food service worker today and every day. It used to be thank the farmer for growing it, because if you're eating it, somebody grew it. But I think it's very important at this time to recognize everybody in the food chain, in the front lines, and thank them for what they're doing. It's in the big picture, where the food came from, I'm not as concerned about as the fact that it's there for all of us to eat. So obviously the most of it is still coming from the same places on our same farms, and we thank them. And the farmers tell me, just look after our support so we can keep doing it. That's good enough. But really what we all need is a little appreciation from the public who they are serving. And I don't speak for me, I speak for the frontline workers that we call them essential workers, but sometimes people don't realize that you're supposed to treat them like essential workers too.
Yeah, I agree. Now, when things start to open back up, because I know we're sort of looking to that now, is there a plan in place? Because obviously when people start transitioning back to restaurants and we can go and get our morning coffee and actually get it made with milk and walk into the coffee shop to get that, do you foresee there being any difficulty getting products again at that point? Because we'll have changed it?
I think first of all, and we introduced the, what you would say, the plan to get back to the way it was over time. On yesterday, I guess we introduced it. And I think it was very apt that they mentioned when the Minister of Finance introduced the plan that it's a roadmap, not a calendar. We don't know what days this will happen, but one piece at a time. As the medical officer of health, who has been directing us all the way through the shutdown, he's also going to be directing us all the way through, based on what they see in their profiling and so forth, to make sure that that every time we open up part of our economy, that if that is having a negative impact on the health, that we can pull back. And if you open it all up at once, you wouldn't know where the problem was and you couldn't fix it. So it would be at least as bad, if not worse, than what we had this time. So we want to make sure we do it methodically. What is safe? If something happens that it causes a problem, we can follow it up and stop it and fix it. And hopefully over a period of weeks, we can phase it all back in. But I think it has to be done in a very methodical way. We can't just call everybody and say, okay, it's over, go for it. Because it was a lot of work and a lot of pain for a lot of people, and they all have worked hard to stop the virus and to slow the spread down, and hopefully that will keep working. But I can assure you that as much as we've accomplished, we can't accomplish the rest of it if we turn around and go back.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if people that are currently maybe unemployed, they've lost their jobs due to the shutdown, you mentioned a website that can direct them for jobs. So where can they find out some information about that?
Well, it would be on the our ministry website. And
okay.
I don't have the number here, but
okay.
Our ministry website would have the portal on there where they can go to, where they can do that. And for healthcare workers, the Minister of Health also has one like that. So you can go there to, if you're a health service worker, a retired healthcare provider who wants to get back and become involved, they have a place where you can do that too. And I think it's again, we've been surprised at how receptive the community is about wanting to help and be part of it, all recognizing that this isn't a one area problem. It's everybody's in it together, and it doesn't matter whether we have a lot of cases in Oxford or a few. If we have a lot of cases in the province or in the country, it's bad for us all, and vice versa.
Yeah. Do you have any last messages to the people of Oxford County?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to say thank you for the people of Oxford County, how well they've done in social distancing and so forth. And it's evident in the numbers of that we have in Oxford County. And it's it's one thing when the pandemic started, it was because people were bringing it in from outside the area, and the success or failure of it was to try and stop the community expansion, that the spread in the community from people in the community. And obviously in Oxford, everybody kept their distance well enough that we have not got that big spread as at this point. And I want to hope that that doesn't happen. But so far, I want to say thank you to all the people who have prevented that from happening.
And definitely a big thank you to the farmers and the food producers too.
Oh, exactly. Obviously, they are. I didn't get to say it earlier, but obviously, the most important thing through this pandemic is to make sure that we protect the health and life of our citizens through the healthcare system. The second one is to make sure we keep food on the table, and that's where the food chain comes in. And we want to say thank you for all the people who worked in that food chain for making that happen, because it doesn't matter what else happens if we don't have food on the table, things are not going to be good for us.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us, Minister, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Well, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for coming, and hopefully we can do this again.